Talk. Talk. Talk to me Tuesday.
Hey there, welcome to Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Madi B, and today I have a very special guest. I have Rish Oberoi with us, representing the Democratic candidate for Texas State House. Now, all of you guys are probably watching right now and kind of want to know a little bit more. We're going to ask a little bit more information in detail for those viewers that are probably watching or may not have any idea of what exactly that means, okay? Trust me, I was one of those. So I want to open up those lines of communication if you guys have any questions for Rish today in regards to what he's representing, his candidacy, all of that good stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from,
Sure,
all
yeah.
that good stuff.
Yeah, and first again, thank you for having me on here. Very excited for it. So like I said, I was born here in Houston. Spent most of my life here growing up. And I only got involved in politics, a little bit when I was younger. Volunteered for Nick Lampson's campaign, if anyone remembers him. Mm-hmm. That was Tom DeLay's old seat. And that was in high school. And then, like most young people, I kind of strayed away from politics, didn't pay too much attention for a bit. And then 2016, for obvious reasons, things, more people got involved. Mm-hmm. I was one of them. I volunteered another campaign then that kind of turned into a job. And then actually rewinding a bit, when I was finishing college, I intended on becoming a teacher for HISD. So I worked worked as an associate teacher in understaffed schools. Mm-hmm. And the thing that became evident to me is that our state does not do the best job of providing schools with resources to raise the next generation of Texans. So that was it was pretty tough for me. I guess I was very unhappy with what I was seeing. So I started getting deeper into politics when I jumped on that campaign. And I decided, I think this is the path to really making a difference here. So after that, I worked in the legislature for former Speaker Joe Straus. And then from there, I went back to campaigns. I worked on Mike Collier's campaign. I was his director of operations. I did about 30,000 miles driving across the state, finding voters all over the place.
Wow.
So that was a very cool experience. And then after that, last year I came back home to Fort Bend and I jumped on Sri Kulkarni's campaign. He ran for Congress in the 22nd District. I was his finance director. And all along that time, I'd paid close attention to the state government because, most people, they know what your city councilman does, they know what Congress does, but no one really seems to know a whole lot about what the state government does and how it operates. Mm-hmm. So yes, I love talking about policy and all the things I'd like to do, but I think the biggest endeavor me and the other state candidates need to embark upon is educating people on why it's important in the first place.
Yeah, and what we want to kind of do here on this platform is also educate those of you guys that are watching and kind of see what exactly this means. Your journey is a very long and very elaborate journey, which I love that. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do. You said that you mentioned that you went on traveling and trying to find voters. So you basically market a campaign. Is it everything that we've seen like on TV, or is it a little bit more behind the scenes?
It's a bit more. It's not quite what you would see on TV, I'd say. A lot of it is just kind of, especially in Texas. For a long time, and I think I still hear it often. People say, "Well, why should I vote here? Because it's a red state." It's always just going to be the Republican that wins. And at this point, the largest group of people is right now? It's non-voters. So there are more non-voters than there are, Republican or Democrat, Independent, what have you. So a big part of it is, starting at the bottom, just convincing people, hey, voting is important. And for those of you who say it doesn't matter, I can mathematically show you that, yes, it does matter, especially if all those non-voters grouped together and voted as a block. So that's a big part of it, is kind of selling that message.
I think that is probably a very important message, because there's a lot of people, you're right, that feel, and maybe you guys watching right now at home or on your phone are thinking, I don't think my voice matters. If I go and I vote, does it really matter? And that answer is really yes.
Yeah, there were a number of state house races last year. We had what they called Blue Wave. A lot of Democrats won. A lot of those races, you have between 60 and 70,000 people voting. Some of them, the Democrat won by, one race was 100 votes, another one was 48 votes. So yes, it really does come down to every single vote in that regard.
Wow. So it is very important. If you guys have any questions as far as the voting side of things, and if you guys want to ask him on, does it really matter, now's your time. I think we're getting back into that voting part again. Elections are starting back up. You guys are probably seeing a lot of things on TV. So I want to now explain to the viewers who may not be aware what it is exactly, your position and what you're running for, and maybe even some of the goals. Like, how does this all work? You probably have to bring it back to like level one, and how it all works, so that they can understand and follow what the impact that this position can take on the community.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Texas legislature, all the things that you worry about in your day-to-day life, because a lot of people say they're not political, they don't care about politics. Well, politics certainly cares about you. Whether you're going to send your kid to a public school, if you're worried about how do I decide between paying for groceries or going to the doctor, are you worried about the next flood that's inevitably going to happen? Like, it's literally all these things are tied back to your state government. So that's basically. It's everything you care about ties back in some way. Frankly, I'm even struggling. There's just a million different things. The problem is none of it matters if people don't go out and vote. So for a long time, Texas has had among the lowest voter turnout rate in the whole country, which itself has one of the lowest voter turnout rates out of all world democracies. So when you have the people who do get elected, it's generally on the basis of special interests, large corporations, people who don't necessarily have the public's best interests at heart. So if you want all that to change, you got to take it back.
If you want your community and your life to change, this is very much hand in hand with how that all works. So I think it's very important. So let's talk a little bit about what are some things that you stand for and what has made an impact on you.
Sure. Yeah. So, our former Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock, he wrote in his book, basically, if we can do one thing right, it's got to be public education. That's what got me on this path in the first place. I think if we can raise a generation of Texans that are, fully capable of taking the reins of the future themselves, I think a lot of other problems will start to solve themselves. So that's number one priority, I think. The legislature did a semi-decent job of passing some good school funding this cycle. I'll get into reasons as to why I think that happened, but there's a bigger game at play here, and it's not just throwing money at the problem. Especially here in Houston, you have some of the best public high schools in the country 3 miles down the road from some of the worst public schools in the country. So there's still that economic and racial divide that I think is not being addressed at all.
So what would you bring to the table to address this?
Sure, yeah. So I think, there's some pretty radical ideas we can put in. So starting at school funding, which isn't, the most fun subject to talk about, but so the way it works now, is supposed to work, the state is supposed to pay 50% of the costs of public schools, and then your local districts pay the other 50%. Well, right now, the state is paying, I think, just under 30%. And the rest of it's coming from districts, which is out of the taxpayer's pocket. Which of course, ultimately, all the revenue is coming from. Most of it's coming from taxpayers in the first place. But the burden is being put upon districts, and when these districts can't come up with that money, everyone blames the schools for not being good enough. When in fact, the state is very much capable of paying 50%, at least 50% of the cost.
Wow.
So yeah, that's one part of it. Another one too, I think there's a lot we can do in terms of teacher training. We did give teachers a pay raise. I think from what I understand, it's only increases the average pay. So a lot of folks who are already making, I think, above the median, but still it's barely a livable wage, they didn't see an increase at all. So that's a big problem. I think there's a lot we can do for teachers. Look at countries like Scandinavian countries, for example. They pay their teachers quite well. Granted, it's pretty difficult to become a teacher there, but the fact is, you see more return in that than you do here in terms of investing.
Yeah.
So those are some basic steps we can take. A lot of kids, especially in inner city schools in Houston, school for them, their home lives it's not conducive to a good learning environment. Whether for a million reasons they're struggling at home. And I think schools should be a place that they can come to where they feel safe, they feel empowered, they feel that they'll be prepared to take on life, because I know a lot of kids don't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I know you're talking about some great solutions. Do you partner up as well from the Texas State House with the district candidates as well?
So say it again.
Like, do you partner up with the candidates from the district? So is that how
from the local school district?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, obviously, a lot of those folks have very good ideas. I think a lot of them would agree that the state government doesn't pay enough attention to them. So, yeah, I absolutely intend to work with all the different district officials.
Yeah, because that's also, they have a lot of ideas as well.
Yeah.
And I think with yours and theirs, it could just be magnified, and we can make a huge difference and impact in our community.
Yeah.
Speaking of impact, tell us how you've already made an impact in the community, whether it's in this community or any others that you've worked in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like a lot of my involvement the last few years has been, largely political, just trying to get people out to vote. And it's not always, and it's very hard. My experience working on other campaigns, it's hard to tell someone, hey, vote straight ticket for a party. So I've never worked for just the Democratic Party. I've worked for Democratic candidates. And so it makes more sense in that regard to say, like, I've always tried to find candidates who I think are going to appeal to the most number of people who have the best ideas. So it's much easier to sell good ideas than it is to sell just blanketly voting for a whole party. For sure, I get that. I think these days might be a little bit easier for obvious reasons. But so I mean that's a big part of it too. And then beyond that, I've been a volunteer for so many different things in my living in Houston. Me and my friends, we try to go to the food bank once a year. At least during the holidays. Yeah, I mean, literacy is a big one for me too. We have a surprisingly low literacy rate in America compared to the rest of the world powers. So again, here in Texas, this being such a big state, a lot of our big national problems are amplified here. It's kind of an odd economies of scale in that regard. So I mean, I was working for a nonprofit up until recently that focused on literacy. That was more in poorer countries, and so.
Awesome.
So that's kind of
That's awesome. So you have done a lot. I'm sure you just mentioned 10% of everything you've done. You've probably done so much more. Is there anywhere that our viewers right now, if they wanted to kind of see what you've done or the impact, or even kind of partner up with you in volunteering, do you have like a website?
Yeah, so website's still splash page. It's richfortexas.com, but that will direct you to my social media, which is it's got everything that I have about me on there. If you want to stay updated on the campaign, you want to see my positions on policies, things like that, background, all that's on there.
Excuse me, but I know social media is huge.
Yeah.
We're on social media right now. But as far as channels that you're on, like I know Twitter is really big on some of the politics and candidates. So are you present on Twitter?
I'm very much present on Twitter. Yeah, it's I wasn't a big social media guy before running for office, but it's pretty necessary, and I admit I'm having a lot of fun with it. So please go check that out as well.
It's a full-time job. Okay?
It really is.
It is. So awesome. So we have a live question from Paul D. This is, what tactics can be implemented to improve on the transparency in litigation? Legislation, not litigation.
Yes, transparency is a big one for me. That gets me most excited, but not necessarily everybody else. So I like to think of the way we try to operate our state government now. It's kind of like trying to run Windows 10 on an abacus. The whole thing is very outdated. People, this is the 10th largest economy in the world, and our legislature meets 4 months every 2 years. Like, that is not enough time to get anything done. And I think most people aren't aware of that. You're at this point, I deal with a lot of people involved in the in the political process, so they know, but the average Texan is completely unaware of things like that. You want to talk about transparency? So there was just today in the news, I learned there was a bill that passed in the current legislature that banned people from protesting pipelines. And which itself, I don't think that was a very good bill to pass. But then, we found out today about why it passed. And of course, these large lobby groups are able to, they're the biggest supporter of a lot of these politicians. So of course, their cookie cutter bills get passed through. And of course, it's made to benefit large corporations, which is actually a pretty common trend in Texas. Because I mentioned before, the folks participating the most in the political process are your large corporations. And again, most people, you hear about that, you might know about it, but it hasn't really sunk in, I think. So that's where we need the most transparency, is seeing where is all the money coming from. Money in politics is pretty bad. The amount of damage I think that's been done, it's going to take years to undo a lot of it as well. So, another good example, if here in Texas, if you are a plaintiff, it's not a very plaintiff-friendly state. If you get hurt, you're in an accident, and it's the fault of a large corporation. There's some pretty serious caps on the damages you can receive. I know obviously this law firm knows a bit about that.
We know all about it over here.
Yeah. So, but and the idea isn't to, obviously there's concerns about frivolous lawsuits and practices, but the fact is the state has a clear record of benefiting the big guys over the little guys. I mean, it's common. It's been happening for the last 25 years or so.
Yeah, no, we definitely want that transparency, and I love hearing this because this is what gets people excited to vote. It's a topic and what difference we can make. Not we, you can make. I'm not
well, it is a we effort. Yeah,
it's a collective effort that we all, the voting means so much because we can't get you to execute some of these great ideas without the vote.
Right.
So that's very important. So what changes do you feel are necessary to prove our legislator to reflect our communities?
Sure, yes. I mean, the current Texas legislature, their statistic came out recently. There are more men named John in the Republican Party than there are women in the legislature.
Wow.
So that's it's very it does not reflect the state of Texas. I mean, it's a largely I think the average age is 58. I mean, it's largely white and it's largely male. And it's not to say if you're a 58-year-old white male, you shouldn't be in the legislature. Of course you should. But at the same time, Texas does not look like that anymore. I mean, I mentioned it's designed it was designed back in the 19th century. But it still reflects a demographic that you saw back then and not now. And a lot of it too, minorities, they suffer the same things I mentioned before, that they don't, feel like voting does much or doesn't matter. I think that's starting to change a lot. So it's a two-way street. Like, yes, I think the legislature needs to do a lot more for these communities, but we also need to galvanize these same communities to come out and vote.
So you're saying there is a lot of updating and upgrading to do, right?
Absolutely.
We're in 2019, about to be in 2020.
Yeah.
The technology's on another level.
Right.
Like, now we're on devices like this, on our phones. So it's crazy to hear that there's still a little backdating.
I'll give you, you mentioned technology. So in Texas, if you want to register to vote, you have to do it 30 days before an election, which I think is kind of dumb. But beyond that, you have to mail in your voter registration form. And I don't know about most folks, but people my age, like no one mails anything.
No.
I remember when I last had to do it, it was such a struggle finding stamps because nobody my age does anything like that. And you look at other states, you have electronic voter registration. You can register at the poll the day of voting, and they see no increases in voter fraud from it. But again, we do things quite backwards here. I like to say we have a horse and buggy legislature because it was designed during a time where you had to take a horse and buggy to get from Lubbock to Austin.
Oh my gosh.
So it's I mean those sort of time frames are no longer needed. I mean, people things are fast. People they want to see. They don't want to wait around with these sort of bureaucratic anomalies that really slow things down.
Right. I mean, now you have to be 18 to vote.
Correct.
Okay? So being 18 to vote, some of our 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they probably don't even use the mail.
Correct.
Again, everything's on technology based. So where do you foresee us, or how long do you foresee us getting to that level? Like, that's crazy to hear that we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I'll say a big part of it too. And again, I'm not advocating for electronic voting. I understand that would be very difficult to pull off, but at least the registration part. I mean, there a lot of reasons young people or minorities don't vote is because of that tedious process I mentioned. So I mean, we can say the question again. The original.
How can we? How long do you think that?
Oh, how long?
Take?
Yeah. So I'll be honest with you. Any politician who tells you like all these grand things are going to accomplish before the next election cycle, they're either lying or they're misinformed. Because the fact is, it's the things that have set us back so far. It took years for that to accomplish. It's going to take years to undo all of that. So I mean, it could be if we manage to get a Democratic majority next year, which is in the House, which is I think very likely or possible at least, that might speed things along. But even then, I think it's creating a culture of understanding that government can do good. That in itself, I think, will take quite some time.
Wow. So quite some time. Let's see. I maybe project 2025, but we'll see. We'll definitely have to have you back on the show within a year, but also after that.
Sure,
so we can kind of see how things are progressing. So we do have a question from Katie S. So, hey, Katie. She's saying, being a minority, did you find it hard to involve yourself in politics or make a name for yourself? Was the process intimidating at all?
So for me, no. I think I got very lucky in that regard, but I do see it happen to a lot of other folks. Growing up, when I was a teenager, just most people around me were Republican, and it was, it's tempting to fall into that fold when everyone around you thinks the same way. I will say that was tough. Just it was more difficult in politics being a Democrat than being a minority, I think, in the beginning. But that obviously has changed a lot over the last couple of years, or last few years. But it's, if you're, I think economic mobility has a much bigger impact on people getting involved. If you're, again, like I mentioned, you're worried about, paying for groceries or buying medicine, things like that. It's pretty hard to tell that person, hey, you need to go out and block walk or things like that for your preferred candidate. I think that's unreasonable. So I would say those factors are a bigger impediment.
So was the process intimidating at all from you? Or was it like...
Yeah, I mean, we're still early on in the process, so I guess I still feel intimidated at times. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty daunting. You put yourself out there. I'm looking at myself on this camera right now, wondering, like, am I looking all right? Things like that.
But that's good. You know what that means? That you have a passion behind it. Because
sure,
if it didn't do anything to you, intimidate you, scare you, whatever, then you probably don't have that passion.
Sure. I mean, I did have folks tell me not to run, to wait, things like that. They say, oh, aren't you too young for this? And I say, well, I'm not running for Emperor of Texas. The whole point of the House of Representatives is to have a diverse background of people. People of different ages, races, religion, political thought, like all these sort of things. It needs to reflect the diverse body of the state.
And here in Houston, we're super diverse.
Correct.
So I think it's awesome that you are representing on that minority side and diverse. And all of us that are minorities, we definitely need to encourage and be a strong force for those that are. So that's awesome. So how do you summarize or explain the current situation with the Texas public schools education? I know you kind of touched base about that a little earlier, but let's get into detail now.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned the overall thing that needs to happen. There needs to be a cultural shift in understanding why education is so important in the state. You have, I went to a private school growing up, and that afforded me a lot of opportunities. But obviously, the vast majority of parents cannot send their kids to these schools.
Right.
But even still, a lot of parents are able to send their kids to really good public schools. But then you still have over half of, I think HISD, over 70%, I think close to 80% of students are economically disadvantaged. I mean, that is a crazy statistic. It's one of the largest.
Would you say 80?
Oh, close to 80%.
Ooh.
It's pretty bad. And again, this is it's one of the largest school districts in the U.S. I think that's unacceptable. So I can sit here and tell you about policies like I mentioned. We need smarter school funding. We need better resources and training for teachers, things like that. But all these ideas don't matter if we don't at least acknowledge that it's a priority. I mean, I'll say this, the Republicans, they stepped it up a bit this year in agreeing to fund, to do a little bit better funding for school. They injected, I think it was over $5 billion into school funding, which is good. Problem is, it was, and the thing that they're not telling you is that it was a last-ditch effort to kind of appear moderate and that they actually care, because I'll tell you this, so Democrats won 12 seats in the Texas House last year, which was quite a sweep. We're only 9 seats away from a Democratic majority, and I think that really scared them. And for all the non-Democrats or Republicans out there who want to see things look better or get better, it's look, competition obviously works. Like we scare the Republicans into doing something good, and like the reasons behind it, like sure, like if you want to get into intent, versus action, but the point is mobilizing that many people to come out and vote, to flipping that many seats, it definitely made a difference. We saw a pretty tangible difference. Now, as for how we're going to keep funding beyond that, because they didn't plan that out, it was just kind of a quick, let's throw money at it solution. I think we need to worry about that. I know everyone's like, property taxes, again, not a super exciting issue to talk about, but it's, but a lot of, obviously, I'm out in the suburbs, Sugar Land and Fort Bend, people worry about their property taxes a lot.
Yeah.
Same thing, that the reason a lot of your property taxes are so high is because schools need more of that money, but the state doesn't want to admit that they're not picking up the slack, so it falls back on you. And B, back to corporations, the largest industrial properties and commercial properties in Texas pay very little on their property taxes, because it's much easier for them. If you ever go down to your appraisal district and say, hey, my house the value's too high, they usually tell you to get out of here. But if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, you can bet they're going to be terrified of you and lower the taxes. And by the way, we lose about $5 billion a year because of that. Just the state of Texas annually, $5 billion a year, and that's money that could go to your schools.
You said billion with
$5 billion, yes,
B
$5 billion per
boy,
year.
Not
Yeah.
M.
So there's a loophole there that Rick Perry, funny enough, pointed out several years ago. But when you look at how come no one did anything about it? Every time they had tried to pass a law to undo that loophole, guess who gave the most money to those same politicians that voted no? It's the same corporations that don't want to actually pay their property taxes. It's not a point of raising taxes, increasing new taxes, nothing like that. It's like, hey, please pay what everyone agreed you were going to pay in the first place. And again, that ties back to schools because that's money out of schools' pockets.
So speaking of schools, I know a lot of us went back to school this week, if not last week. So congratulations if you're a parent that have a child that went back to school. But what can we do as a community, as a parent, as a brother or sister to bring that awareness to help that situation improve?
Yeah, well, right now it's pretty early on. I mean, the primary is March 3rd, 2020. We're still some time away. So the best thing you can do now is register to vote. And if you're already registered, get 5 friends to register and tell them to get 5 friends to register. There are a lot of unregistered voters. And I think that's the best thing you can do for now. And then, next year, if you want to get involved with campaigns, I implore you to get involved with mine. I'm sitting here, I can ask you that. But if you don't live anywhere near me, if you live in a competitive district, get involved in that one. And I'd urge you to not get tempted to get sucked up into the big circus of national politics. I know it's very tempting to
entertaining.
To worry about who's tweeting from the White House this year. That stuff is very tempting to get involved with. But I would say put all that aside and start at the very bottom of your local and your state candidates.
So I think that's a great point to try to get people to vote. I know right now we did get a question: what district are you representing?
Sure.
I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Because if you love everything he's saying, we also need to make sure
absolutely
you guys are in that district. So what district are you representing?
Sure. So it's District 26. It's all inside of Fort Bend. I have majority of Sugar Land. I've a little bit of Mission Bend, Four Corners area, and a little bit of Richmond. So it's all out there. And I will say, so I mentioned before, we flipped 12 seats last year, 9 this year. This seat was one of 8 that came within 5 points last year of ousting Republican incumbent. So it's definitely being targeted by the Texas Democrats. By different groups as one of the most likely seats to be able to flip next year. But it also has a very high Asian population. Actually has the highest Asian population in the entire state out of all 150 state house districts. And the interesting about that, the Asian community is largely non-voting, and B tends to vote Republican. And then, of course, younger Asians, just like younger people in general, don't vote a whole lot. So the campaign I worked on last year, Sri Kulkarni's campaign, we increased the Asian voter turnout by 12-fold. Between 2014 and 2018.
Wow.
It was pretty significant leap forward. So that's not to say this is, obviously I'm not only worried about the Asians in the district. I mean, there are, all in all, I'm mostly concerned about my generation. We're the first to be worse off than our parents' generation, both economically and in terms of health. So these are things that obviously people my age are worried about, but their parents should be worried about it too.
Yeah.
So to rewind a bit, going off a bit of a tangent on that, but so the district, I told you about where it was. So it's also heavily gerrymandered. If you look at a picture of it, they call it an octopus-shaped district. So for those of you who don't know, gerrymandering is where the powers that be who draw the districts, they make sure that, and I'll throw up a little graphic on my Facebook, Rish for Texas. Basically, they'll draw it in such a way that it excludes certain voting populations, whether it's on usually on racial lines and obviously on party lines as well. I'll give you an example. There's a big neighborhood in my district called Avalon, and it's just right there sitting in the heart of Sugar Land, which is, I have 90% of Sugar Land in my district, and it's been carved out and included with a very rural district because they want to dilute that vote. So and you see that in different parts. Like the northern part of my district is largely African American and Hispanic. It's been completely, I only have a strip of it, and everything around it has been carved out and added to other districts to dilute the vote.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. We'll put a map here in a little bit. District 26.
Correct.
So we'll put it in the comment section so that way you guys can see exactly what he's talking about. Any way the lines of the district will be ever redone?
Actually, yes. So that's why this election is even more critical than years past. So every 10 years, obviously we have the census. The next one's coming up 2020. So 2021, the next legislative session, they're going to redraw the lines for every single district. So And I'll just be honest, if we do not take back a Democratic majority, if we don't get a Democratic majority in the Texas House next year, you can bet that they're going to take a lot of these districts where Democrats have recently won, and they're going to carve them right back up again. They did it 10 years ago, and they'll do it again. There's no reason to think they won't. I think the only solution to that is make sure that that the Republicans are no longer in power. And I know it sounds very partisan for me to say that, but you also, just on an objective level, why would you want the same people in charge for so long? Republicans have been fully in charge of the state for 20 years at this point. And in that time, we now have the highest maternal death rate, and not only in the U.S., in the entire developed world. More women die in childbirth or around childbirth in Texas than the rest of the developed world. That's baffling. I mentioned our gigantic public school problem. And all these things happen under single party leadership. It's never good. I mean, in the free market of ideas, you want competition. So that's the thing I would tell to people who don't necessarily identify as Democrats but are tired of Republican leadership. That's I think a pretty good reason to not keep them in power.
We want to redo those lines. Let me tell you what, there's so much growth in this city.
That's exactly it.
We are growing exactly where you're at. So like the Fort Bend area, Sugar Land, Pearland even, Rosenberg, up north, Cypress, like it's literally expanding and seeping out. So it would make perfect sense to redraw the lines,
Exactly.
But I think it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it's tough. And big part of it too, a lot of states, they have independent commissions that draw these lines. I agree. It shouldn't be Democrats drawing those lines. It shouldn't be Republicans. Politicians, who watches the watchers? You can't have the people in charge in charge of themselves as well. So one of the things I would fight for, and I'm sure a lot of other candidates will, next session or a lot of legislators will next session, is to have an independent commission draw these lines. You can add technology into the mix. I mean, there are a lot of AI programs that have been developed over the years that find the most intelligent way to draw these lines that don't purposely factor people out. I mean, we had a big Supreme Court ruling recently that Texas, I forget which district, but yeah, it was determined that it was drawn to exclude racial minorities to dilute their voting power. I mean, this is a known problem here in Texas.
That's crazy because it also doesn't encourage those of us. We did have a minority question. How does that feel? It's intimidating. But those of us that are voting that are minorities, it doesn't encourage us to kind of hear that strategy put into place. Yeah,
so no, that makes sense too. I mean, so that is another reason that was brought up a lot in terms of why people don't vote. They mentioned gerrymandering. Well, you can't gerrymander statewide and countywide elections, so you absolutely need to vote in those. And B, like I mentioned, a lot of these seats, despite the efforts of Republican lawmakers, are now competitive. Mine, for example, it was drawn. I mentioned it was drawn in such a way, but they never anticipated there being such a high minority presence, especially in the Sugar Land area. I mean, it's especially a big South Asian and East Asian presence as well. So back when they drew the lines 10 years ago, they didn't expect such an explosion and such motivation for these groups to start voting. So
if you guys see on the screen right now,
there we go.
It looks already crazy. So this is what you were talking about, the craziness.
Yeah.
It is a little on the see-through side, but the orange lines are depicting the area, the district in which you're talking about.
Correct.
As you mentioned, you said it looks like an octopus. It looks a little crazy, but
the Texas Tribune has a really good map too. If you pull that one up.
So we could put that one up here in a second so you guys could see. But you're right. Those lines are excluding some areas for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense for it to be drawn that way. If you look at like school board districts, again, there's like 5 different ones that intersect through Houston, and it's because Houston's a very left-leaning or Democrat voting area. But it's been divided into all these different school districts to dilute that vote. And you see it in the city of Austin as well. City of Austin has like 4 different congressional districts, which makes absolutely no sense. It should not be shaped that way, but we know why.
Yeah, for sure. So you guys will see that map here in a little bit. So how would your candidacy affect our legal community?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned, and a lot of things I'd like to do. It's not obviously, if it incidentally benefits legal communities, that's great. Obviously, the main concern is the people's well-being.
Absolutely.
I mentioned the punitive damages thing earlier. I mean, ironically, this is something our governor benefited from himself. He was involved in a horrible injury when he was younger, and he was rightfully compensated for it. So, but I mean, he and his party over the years, they made it very difficult for people to benefit the same way. As I mentioned, so I mean, if laws we pass ensure that these large businesses or corporations or whatever, that they're I think if give you an example. So if it is cheaper to just pay a fine or pay someone off than to actually fix what's been causing the problem, they're going to do it 9 times out of 10.
Wow.
So I mean that's look at Facebook, for example. I mean all this the data privacy issues. It's cheaper for them to just pay fines. They're making a big deal. Oh, Facebook paid a $5 billion fine. Well, and it's the biggest fine ever. $5 billion is not much to Facebook or to any. And here in Texas, we have some pretty seriously big corporations have a presence here. So that's a big one as well. That I think the government deciding that what number people should be compensated with. I think that's gone completely out of control. I mentioned the pipeline thing earlier too. If the fact that you can't protest the pipeline in your own property anymore in Texas, that's appalling. I think people need to start suing immediately. I think that's already happened. Yes, so that's one of those cases where I'd say yes. Go get a lawyer if you have a pipeline going through your property and make a big deal out of it.
Yeah,
that's pretty
crazy.
bad.
Those are a lot of crazy things. You're bringing a lot of things to the light that we may not know about, or watching TV may not be giving the full-on
right. Yeah.
information and or truth. So this is great information. If you guys have any questions leading up to Let's Ask Away. So what are some other categories that reveal your passion?
Sure. Other like political ones?
Yes,
okay.
Political categories that reveal your passion.
Sure.
Education was one you already mentioned.
Yeah.
We kind of touched base on the legal side of things. What other passions do you have in your candidacy?
Yeah, so it's a big one for me is access, just basic access to the political process. I mentioned how hard it is to register. And for me, that's really what it is. Like it's hard to, explain that in just a concise soundbite, unfortunately, but there is a culture in which people don't feel like it makes any sense to get involved with the process at all. So if I win and I'm at this for another 10, 20 years or whatever, I would like to see Texas voter turnout hit 75%. Like it's a very odd number. It's a strange number, but I think it's probably the most feasible that I can see over the course of my future career. So that's it. I want to see people actually come out and vote. There are so many people that don't vote. And that's probably the biggest thing for me. It drives me crazy, especially as a young person. A lot of my friends, they vote now because they've heard me, complain about it for so long and get on their cases for it. But hey, if that's what it takes to get people out, if it takes me coming at your door and annoying you into voting, I'm totally fine with that too.
Yeah.
So it's getting people involved. It's and I would say to young people out there, volunteering on a campaign, it's a ton of fun. Even if you don't want to get into politics, it sets you up to go into other fields if you want. I have a lot of friends who went up to work, work in government. They encountered medical professionals for those who wanted to become doctors. They meet people like that. You make friendships for life, things like that. It's a lot of fun getting involved as much as you wouldn't think it is.
Yeah. So have an open mind to it, right? 'Cause
yes.
it could be fun. So I want you to kind of tell our viewers about the voting process. I know I want to kind of mention, when does it start? What does it look like? For those that maybe just turned 18, or for those that have never gone to vote, or for our minorities in the House.
Yeah.
What does the voting process look like?
Sure, yeah. So like I said, first thing you got to do is register in a very 20th century manner. But it's don't wait till next year. You got to do it now because the city of Houston has their municipal elections coming up. I think everyone needs to vote in that. They're projecting a pretty low turnout compared to like your presidential years or midterm years, because people generally only vote in those times. So yeah, get registered. Right now. Go to just Google. What is it? Vote.texas.gov. Print out that form, mail it in, and then once you're registered, you only have to change it or update it if you move. And then beyond that, like I said, 30 days before the election, that has to be received. And going to the polls is simple. We now have county-wide polling in both Harris and Fort Bend, which is great. So you just Google, where can I vote? You can go to any one of those locations. Early voting is the best. It doesn't take long at all, usually, which may or may not be a good thing because it shows how many people are actually voting, but
avoids the long lines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So early voting, I would say, is one of the few things that Texas does right in that regard. It gives you a lot of options. It doesn't take that long at all. I early voted last year. It took 20 minutes. In and out. Your job has to let you go vote. As much as they might make a fuss about it, it's illegal for them to do that. You're definitely allowed to go vote, and they have to let you do it.
Wow. Okay. So I know that is true for this company, D. Miller and Associates. Last year, or whenever it was. I can't remember. All my ears are kind of mumbling. But they did allow for everyone to go vote at that time. Not only did it encourage them how important it is, but yes, you can go whatever time, lunch break, around it, all that good stuff. So what is it that we can do to help with the voting process?
Yeah, like I said, the main thing right now is I'm going to sound like a broken record. Register your friends to vote. There are millions and millions of people that are able to vote that are not registered. And beyond that, there are even more people that are registered that have never voted. So you know who those people are in your friends and family group. Okay, you have to really, assuming you want to get them to vote for the 2020 election, you have several months to get them, to convince them to do it. You know, and whether, and it's less about telling them who to vote for, because that's when you get into difficult territory. Very few people like to talk politics with people close to them that they disagree with. I understand how dicey that can get. But at the very least, get them out there and vote. Yeah,
what we probably will do is probably put a post up saying to go vote. Make sure you share it on your Facebook page. Now, all of you guys have more than 5 friends on Facebook.
Yes.
All of us do. So there is no excuse. I've already seen y'all's Facebook, most of you guys. So maybe we could do kind of a little contest in regards to that. That's how we can give back, help, and increase that. I think that would be very, very important. So I have a final 2 questions for you, okay? We're almost to the end. So Rish, what sets you apart from your opponents that will encourage people like us to vote for you?
Sure, yeah. So the first thing I have to get through, I'm in a primary with 2 other opponents. I will say I have the most legislative experience out of both of them. I have the most campaign experience out of both my primary opponents. Fundraising, I mentioned how awful it is. I mean, it does need to change. I think there's a lot we can do in that regard. But until then, it's what drives winning an election. So far, we've raised just over $60,000, which is more money than any Democratic candidate has ever raised for this seat. And me and my supporters, we did it in the space of 4 months. So I think that's pretty impressive. It shows a lot of confidence. So all these, and not to mention, if we want to talk about policies, the consultants and the strategists, they'll tell me to come up here and just do the sound bites, like talk about the schools, talk about flood prevention, things like that. And like all these things are obviously important. I'm gonna fight tooth and nail to make it happen. But the thing that no one's gonna tell you is how exactly much of a swamp, to quote another politician, how much of a swamp the system is. And that is, I think, what I can provide more than the other candidates, is to get people to be part of this process. It's not about what I can do; it's about what I can empower everyone else to do. So if I win, you can bet I'm going to be calling out Republicans and Democrats for sketchy behavior, which is a lot. Like I said, if you're a lobbyist, you can bet you'll get an audience with the state rep. If you're just a regular person, and I've been the person who's had to sit there and tell them like, oh, sorry, so and so is not available right now, and I know they're available, they just don't want to answer to you. So these are the things that I think the public is not aware about, and these are the things that I want to make light of. I like it. I love it. I think that's awesome that it sets you apart. Now, you did say fundraising, which is part of this whole process. Right. And on your website, I'm guessing there is a link on there. There is, yes. First of all, 60,000 is impressive. So congratulations. I know that you're not even done. No, so not even close, unfortunately. That's a little mark. But what can we do on the fundraising side? We can just go there and vote. Do you sell merch? Like, what is that look like? No merchandise yet. I'm sure we'll have, hats, T-shirts, all that stuff shortly. But again, rishfortexas.com. There is a link to contribute on there. There are no contribution limits in Texas, which I think is deplorable. Unfortunately, most big states have them. The federal races have contribution limits, but until then, I'll use that to my advantage until we can win and change the way that works. But rishfortexas.com. If you just Google Rish in Texas, I'm the only thing that pops up. So that certainly helps a lot too. Name. That's the plus of that. So where does this fundraising money go towards, or what does it help on? Oh yeah, so I mean, it's the paid media is a big one too. I mean, you gotta send a lot of mailers out to a lot of people. You gotta pay for things like Facebook ads. I mean, I need staff. I've been a campaign staffer, and it's a very thankless job. You get paid very little, a lot of hours. So I want to make sure all the people who help me out, who work for my campaign, that they feel well compensated for it. So that's a big one too. Which also attracts the best talent as well, because this whole thing is a group effort. This whole country, both on the campaign side and political side, it's run by young staffers. So if you're worried about your congressman or your senator, that they're doing well. Worry about who they're hiring, because that's what really all the work gets done. So
you once upon a time were there. Huh?
that was me too. Yeah. So yeah, exactly.
So you've seen it, been there, felt it, everything. So that's also another great tactic as what sets you apart is that you've actually lived it for quite some time. How many years total have you been doing the political world?
Yeah, for the last almost 4 years now.
4 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Just as soon as I graduated college.
You
Yeah.
blink and it's you're already 5 years in.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So voting for you will be early voting starts beginning of March.
So March 3rd is the primary. I don't think they've set the early voting date yet. It'll probably start around February 20th, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we'll probably get you back on the show around that time so you can advise on when the next time frame of voting is and all that good stuff. So that way we keep on you guys on making sure that you guys vote and share it with your friends. So what I like to tell all my guests and ask all my guests is if you had to leave our viewers with one last thing, whether it's a quote, a little 1 second pitch, what would you say to the people watching us now?
Yeah, someone asked me about a quote earlier, and like immediately thought of the one I love, which is Sam Houston. He said, "Do right and risk the consequences." Now he was a very interesting guy, controversial in some respects, but when he was governor of Texas, that was the beginning of the Civil War. He was ousted because he didn't want Texas to leave the Union. He understood that was a terrible thing for the country to split apart like that. And I think it's more relevant today now than ever. People feel very divided. Whenever I even mention politics, people very, quietly ask, "Oh, well, can I ask what party you're with?" Things like that, because they understand it's touchy.
Yeah.
So I would say, people have to leave that air of feeling uncomfortable and just power through it. Like, it's okay to have a dialogue. It's okay to disagree. But we all want the same things. Everybody wants, better public schools. They want affordable health care. They want to make sure they don't get flooded out of their homes. Everybody wants these things. And it's not a point of, and people often say, "Oh, but we disagree on how to get there." Like, no, we don't. The only thing that's preventing these things from happening are large special interests. So if you're not taking control of your political process, you can bet the billion-dollar corporation down the road is going to do that instead of you.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with you. It is a touchy subject. I think some people are shy away from it. They don't even want to open up the can. They don't even want to talk about it. But just like you mentioned, it's okay. It's exercising a very positive debate. It's not an argument. Some people do get heated on that scope of things. But I think it is safe for us to have a voice and have a voice in making a difference. So I want to thank all of you guys. I want to thank you guys ahead of time for sharing the show. Share, because we want to make sure we get the most votes this year and increase that to, what did you say, 75%?
75%. We can do it.
We could do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I'm going to help you any which way that we can in this platform to get you there. So I want to thank all of you guys for watching Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday and for liking the show. Until next time, I'm your host, Madi B. Bye.